welcome to our next installment of Axiom. To everyone there, my name is Albert Jansen van Vieren, and welcome to Axiom. I'm coming to you from our offices in Johannesburg, where some of us are in the offices, but mostly not in the offices. It's a sunny day in Johannesburg. We've just passed 100 days of lockdown, and we're going to have some discussion today around blockchain, and I'm going to welcome Bernard Boosie. Welcome to today's Axiom. Welcome to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Albert.
Yeah, so today we're going to talk about blockchain. So Bernard is going to talk about for 20 minutes. What we're going to do a bit differently today is after that, we're going to welcome a panel. So on the panel, we're going to have Bernard, we're going to have Connie Bloom, who's a platform owner at Andile, and Erik van der Linde, who has joined us previously on Axiom and spoke to us about blockchain. But yeah, today's discussion on blockchain, is it fit to compete? Is it something that should be rolled out? All of us have heard it, we've seen it, but is it actually fit to compete in the financial market, but also in other industries? And I think there's a couple of myths that Bernard is going to try and break today in his discussion. So as normal, throughout the whole session, you can use the Q&A button. So in the middle down on the screen, you'll see there's a Q&A button. You can use this to submit questions. And then while the panel is going, you can submit questions and they will answer that at the end as well. So I just encourage you to use that to ask questions. But Bernard, so welcome. And yeah, tell us a bit about yourself.
Well, the boring bit is I'm a software engineer at Andile Solutions. Working in sort of the innovation space where we're building new products for the financial world. We really believe in what we're doing there, and I enjoy my job. Let me think what else. Well, something that maybe is not so obvious about me is I'm really good at making peanut butter jar lamps. And if you can see it over there, but it kept myself busy during the lockdown when I didn't have access to a nice bedside lamp. I took advantage of my other skills aside from software engineering. And if the blockchain thing doesn't work out, then I'll be starting a peanut butter jar lamp industry. So just a little bit of advertising there in case I need it.
Great. I really hope for you this blockchain thing works out. Because so as always, we also make use of polls during the webinar, and I'm just going to launch one quick poll as a bit of an icebreaker. And I'm sure we've all seen this ads out where they say, like this man, and there's always a picture of someone standing next to a Ferrari or standing next to something very flashy. Do you want to make 80,000 Rand? The revolution is here. Financial independence is within you. What is your answer to that? Absolutely. Tell me more. These are just scams and things that give blockchain a bad name, and you will definitely lose your money. This is just going to be good to give Bernard just a clue of his audience. And Bernard, 5 years ago, which one would you have chosen? And today, which one do you choose?
I would really like to believe that I would always have picked the these are scams one, but at the moment, I'm wondering, with lockdown, things can be getting tough. Might be nice to meet this man and find out if it's really true. But no, I'm quite happy to see that most people are not going for that option.
Yeah, I'm gonna end the poll. I'm just gonna share the results there. But yeah, these are just scams, and these are the things that are being out there and communicated around blockchain. And a lot of people, when you talk to them about blockchain, are either going to say, well, it's Bitcoin, or they're going to say it's a scam, because the message that goes out to the general public is not always that true and that positive when it comes to blockchain. And that's what you're going to try and break for us today, break it down and see if it's fit to compete. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to you, Bernard, and then later we'll come back and we'll welcome our panelists to the discussion.
Okay, cool. Let me turn on this presentation here. Cool. Okay, well, thank you very much, Albert, for that introduction. And as has been alluded to, I'm going to be your guide today as we take a look at the shape of blockchain. The onion that is blockchain has got many layers. So today we're going to try and pull back just enough of them to try to get a handle on this technology. And hopefully then we'll be able to evaluate it in context. And hopefully while taking apart these layers of the blockchain onion, there won't be too many tiers. So just going to start off by saying that blockchain can feel rather complicated. So we'll start off today by just assessing its structure. We'll go back to basics and we'll break down the chain, examining some of the fundamentals of this technology. Next, we'll consider some of the challenges posed by our increasingly data-centric and online world, and we'll look at how blockchain can help solve some of these problems and a few places where it already is. Next, we'll take a moment to just position the technology. While blockchain is incredible and potentially revolutionary, it's definitely not the solution to all problems, as it often is punted as. And so we'll look at some things that should be kept in mind when evaluating this technology. Finally, we'll go over to the question and answer session, which Albert spoke about a little bit earlier. So I think that while parts of this technology can be confusing and technical and difficult, at a conceptual level, the fundamentals can really be understood by anyone. Advanced levels of technical expertise are not required. So with that said, what exactly is blockchain? First of all, as we mentioned in the introduction, blockchain is not Bitcoin. Bitcoin is just one of many cryptocurrencies, which are a particular application of blockchain. Blockchain is sort of to currency what the internal combustion engine was to the transportation sector. That is, it is what is described as an enabling technology. And technologies like these are typically characterized by lots of subsequent derivative technologies that use this technology in them. Another way that these technologies are often referred to is general purpose technologies. And other examples include the electricity and the internet. And in the same way that the internet made Facebook possible, blockchain made Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies possible. And I think the key takeaway that I just want to sort of stress over here is that in the same way that the internet didn't just make Facebook and other social media platforms possible, blockchain is also going to give rise to a whole host of innovative derivative technologies. With that said, since blockchain is not Bitcoin, let's take a little bit of a closer look at what it really is. So at its core, blockchain provides a way to solve the immutability problem. It's a particular way of structuring stored information that enables immutability. That is, it makes it possible to prevent changes in information once that information has been stored, or at the very least, it helps us to identify when that information has been tampered with in some way. To understand immutability, imagine we have some information stored in a table like this one. If this data is immutable, it should not be possible for us to insert new rows of information among those that are already there. It should also not be possible for us to change any information in those existing rows, and we shouldn't be able to change the order of these rows. One way we could solve this problem is by locking away our table and making sure that nobody ever has access to it ever again. But this would not be very useful in most active systems, where usually we also want to be able to add new information into our table while assuring that the existing information is not tampered with. And of course, once that new row is added, we don't want it to be tampered with either. So at its core, blockchain provides a way to solve this problem. To understand how it does it, we need to first take a moment to look at the concept of cryptographic hashing. Now, this is one of those places where things can get a little complicated, but all you really need to understand is that a cryptographic hash function is sort of like a machine that meets a few simple criteria. First of all, you should be able to put any information in, and you can think of information generally as anything that can be represented accurately as a string of characters. And quite conveniently, that is any kind of digital information, including cute pictures of cats like this, which can be represented accurately as a string of characters. The next thing that a cryptographic hash function needs to be able to do is it needs to be able to turn that information into a fixed output. And the length of the output should always be the same, regardless of what input we put in. So the same output should also always result in a unique, the same input, sorry, should always result in a unique output. So every single different piece of information we put in should come out with a fixed length, different output, regardless of how similar these things are. And this is known as collision resistance. So even if we have two things that are very similar, like these two versions of Bob over here, where a single character has got the case changed, you can see that the outputs are both the same length, but they are radically different. This process should also be computationally easy, which means that it should be possible for the average computer to calculate this without taking too much time. And a final requirement is that to reverse the process, it should be computationally infeasible, which also, another way of thinking of that is it should take an incredible amount of time so that it's not really feasible to go backwards. So with this cryptographic hash function, going back to our table of information, if we want to turn it into a blockchain, we start by considering each row in our table as a block of information. Then starting from the top, we take the textual representation of an individual row, which might look something very similar to this. And we take that string of characters and we feed it through our cryptographic hash function. The output, which is now unique, and that output cannot be generated by anything else other than this specific textual piece of information, we then take that and we insert it as a value into our next row. We then repeat the process with this row. And we take this row, including the hash of the previous row, and we put it again through our cryptographic hash function and insert that into the next row. And we continue this process all the way down through the table, effectively linking our rows or blocks of information together into a blockchain. So if we go and we do this throughout our entire table, once we've reached the end, we've effectively made our data immutable. Since if we were to change any information in one of our rows, it would mean that the hash value in the next row would no longer match the altered row. Any alteration to the data effectively breaks the chain. The same is true if we try to insert a new row of information in among these rows which already exist. Even if our new row has got the correct hash to point to the previous row, the next row will not point to our new row of information. And our final requirement of being able to add new pieces of information without tampering with the old information quite easily is also possible, since all we need to do is take our last row of information, put it through the hash function and insert it into the new row before we put the new row on. And that is essentially it. That is blockchain, so you'll get a nice Bitcoin medal. But really that is it. That's the fundamentals of the technology, and that's really where the idea of blockchain ends. From there on, all of the detail is in the particular implementation of this technology. So that is, how exactly is this linking done? For what purpose is the linking done? What information is being stored in the table? And very importantly, where this information is stored. So before I move on to looking at applications of this technology, I just want to take a moment to look at an implementation detail that really makes a huge amount of difference. So you may have realized that while our information is now immutable, it is only immutable as long as the individual or entity which is in control of the information does not allow tampering. Because if I own this database, I can just go and change anything I like, and I can recalculate all the hashes from the top going all the way down. Now, when you think about the technology this way, it almost begins to seem a little pointless. But the problem lies within that concept of ownership. Who owns the database in which our blockchain is stored? So the way that we can solve this problem is by having multiple copies of our blockchain on separate systems or nodes, each of which validate the blockchain. This now makes tampering a lot more difficult. In this sort of setup, instead of presenting each new row of information to our single node or our single database, which will hash it and put it onto the chain, we now present it to the entire network of nodes. And each of these nodes will add the row onto their blockchain, and they will all continuously communicate with each other and validate the blockchain over time. And essentially, they will communicate with each other and come to what we say consensus around what the true version of the blockchain is. Now, tampering is a lot more difficult, because if we want to tamper with the information, we have to somehow override the collective consensus power of the network. The longer the blockchain gets and the more nodes we get in our network, the more secure it becomes. For example, the public Bitcoin blockchain has got around 100,000 nodes. Although an exact estimation is a bit difficult, you can imagine that with that many nodes, you'd need a significant amount of computing power to be able to override the collective decision-making ability of the network. So with that understanding of sort of the nature of blockchain, I'm going to take a moment to just talk about some of the problems that this technology can address. In today's digital and interconnected world, more and more of our data is continually going online. And usually this happens because different people need to have easy access to that same data. In this environment, trust is very important, because often these different parties that need access to the same information may not inherently trust each other, because they may have differing agendas. And so as a result, you have an environment where trust is very important, and you've got all this information that needs to be spread among people. Blockchain can help with a few problems that emerge in this environment. Today, tables of information, much like we looked at when examining the structure of blockchain, are all over the place. Usually the information is in tables that need to be shared between these different entities, as I mentioned. So the reason that this happens is because in our integrated world, there's a lot of economic activity taking place in business networks that span all over the world, different national boundaries, geographic boundaries, jurisdictional boundaries. And all of these networks are made up of lots of different participants, such as producers, consumers, suppliers, various stakeholders. And each of these entities, they own and control items of value known as assets. And these assets could be anything. They could be physical, such as gold, cars, homes, or apples, or they could also be virtual, such as deeds or patents or stock certificates and bank money. And in the way these networks are set out today, typically each different entity, or each significant player at least, like a bank or a large organization, will have their own copy of a table in which transactions of these assets is stored. And So there's a number of problems that emerge with the system of business ledgers in use today. Because each significant player usually has their own ledger or table of information recording the ownership of these assets, there's quite a large chance of errors taking place in these separate tables, or perhaps there could even be intentional misuse or tampering. This lack of transparency into the different versions of truth essentially gives rise to quite a large potential for either data corruption or actual business corruption or fraud, and this inevitably leads to disputes at some point down the line. This lack of trust results in a whole host of third-party intermediaries and dispute resolution processes that either have to get involved to resolve what the true version of the truth is, or to continuously sort of audit all the different players in a particular transaction or in a particular business network. These risks and uncertainties all contribute to missed business opportunities, and other issues such as out-of-sync copies of the data can also lead to faulty business decisions that are made on temporarily incorrect data. At best, the ability to make an informed decision can potentially be delayed while differing copies of the ledgers are reconciled with one another. A public distributed blockchain ledger is sort of a decentralized, distributed, transparent solution to this problem. Now each of our different stakeholders, who might each have a potentially differing agenda, so they can't perhaps trust each other on any other level, they now have a single trustworthy version of the truth. And the way that a blockchain network, when you have a network of distributed nodes like this is typically set up, it'll also be possible for you to always trust that you have the latest version of that truth, as well as being able to trust that version of the truth. So at its core, the solution to this problem is decentralized trust, and use cases for this sort of trust exist across a whole range of industries. So now I just want to take a moment, if I can find the polling button. Here is the polling button. Perhaps Albert can point me to the polling button over here. There we go. Okay. So I just want to take a moment to put up another poll. And this relates directly to what I'm about to talk about, which is now that you guys have got a little bit more of a handle on what the blockchain technology is and the sort of problems it can solve, I'm just putting this poll up to give you guys an opportunity to think about what industries you think this can be applied in. And I'll refer back to the results of the poll just now, but as we go along, hopefully you guys can work out the answer. So there's quite a few different industries that it can be applied in. The first industry, which is perhaps quite obvious in a way, is that it was introduced for the Bitcoin exchanges and as the technology backing Bitcoin, but it funds uses in banking and financial services much more widely than that. The end-to-end transparency in ownership and transactions can improve speed and efficiency while reducing intermediaries and costs. In this industry, blockchain makes it possible for us to settle securities trades in minutes rather than days, for example. In supply chains and logistics, a single, transparent, reliable source of truth makes it possible for the flow of goods and payments over time to be tracked and for you to always be able to trust where a particular asset is within the network. Another example is in the insurance industry, where a reliable, transparent source of truth shared between different parties can store a historical record of claims and other insurance activities, which can lead to higher degrees of trust between insurers and consumers. Oh, that word's a little bit difficult. The next industry in which it can find application is the entertainment industry, where an ecosystem of trust around content ownership and usage can reduce artist exploitation. It can decrease piracy, and it can promote the direct monetization of the artist's work directly to them. So it's possible to dedicate an entire webinar to talking about use cases, and I'm just going to end the poll here so that I can share the results. And you'll see that most people got it right here. All of these industries, blockchain can find application, and beyond this, there are certainly more industries, and I could carry on talking about it for a while, but I just want to stop there because I want to take a moment to highlight a specific use case example, which shows how blockchain is being applied in an area where its utility or application may not be as apparent or as obvious as it might be in banking and insurance. Tracer is an application of blockchain developed by the De Beers Group, which is a great example of an application of blockchain technology in the diamond supply chain. Its goal is to enhance trust by establishing provenance, which is where something has been or who it's been owned by over time, authenticity and traceability of natural diamonds throughout their value and supply chain. There are quite a lot of benefits to having a more connected or more trustworthy supply chain like this. It starts off right at the producer level, where the producers are able to effectively communicate country of origin of the diamonds and authenticity of the natural diamonds. This information can be passed on to the producers, which will process those diamonds through to the manufacturers, which will process those diamonds into more sort of polished or cut diamonds or into jewelry itself. And it gives them the ability to demonstrate and ensure traceability. This gives them a greater insight into their own inventory, where all the diamonds come from, and it actually helps them attract financing because they can prove that the diamonds are sort of ethically sourced, and it can help to reduce the sort of concept of blood diamonds or diamonds that have been sourced through conflict or through some kind of not so ethical means. This information can then also be passed on to jewelers and retailers, which can enable next generation customers to make data-driven purchasing decisions. It allows the consumers to have complete trust in the provenance, traceability, and authenticity of these natural diamonds. So this is a physical thing, it's not a piece of information. So I just want to talk a little bit about how it can actually get onto the ledger. So the way that they get these diamonds onto a blockchain secured ledger, or remember, a ledger is just sort of a table of information. The way they do this is they take each diamond and it gets represented by a digital asset counterpart on the platform. Each diamond gets a whole lot of information collected about it, such as the cut, the color, the clarity, and the carat, and some detailed 3D scans as well as images are taken of this diamond. All of this information comes together, they create what's called a digital asset, and then before the asset actually goes onto the blockchain, they actually go back and they compare the digital asset to the rough diamond before it gets put onto the blockchain. This then allows the diamonds to be transferred privately and securely, along with all of the information about them, to the next step of the process, which is typically the manufacturing. At this step, as the diamond moves through the manufacturing process, at each step, including planning, which is sort of planning what is this diamond going to become, cutting the diamond, polishing it, and grading it, all the way through that process, data relevant to each step is consistently added. So sort of transactions will keep getting added to the blockchain, adding to the concept of this digital entity, this digital asset entity over time. At the end of the process, when the diamonds finally get into the store, we have a complete digital asset with country of origin, full traceability, and verified authenticity of the natural diamond. This gives retailers and the consumers that want to buy diamonds from them access to a data-rich story about their diamonds with verified and trustworthy information from each part of the process. And they have quite a beautiful application where consumers will be able to look at the diamond, they can investigate their diamond, they can look at which country it came from. It even goes as far as them being able to see how the company that mined those diamonds in that country is contributing to their local community, or I suppose lack thereof, which may discourage you from buying a particular diamond. So at this point, I think I've sort of demonstrated my allegiance. My colors are nailed firmly to the blockchain mast for certain applications. But that said, I just want to round it up a little bit by making clear that blockchain is not the answer to all data-centric problems. There are situations in which this technology shouldn't be applied. And with the powerful use case buzz out there especially, and lots of people trying to sort of sell it as the solution to every problem, I just want to take a moment to speak about what we should consider when assessing the solution for a problem we're trying to solve. First of all, we should consider whether or not a business network is involved. And what I mean by this is if the data that you're trying to store somewhere or that you want to keep safe just needs to be accessed by you or a single team, or no part of the data ever needs to leave your organization, it's fairly likely that putting it into a blockchain may be more trouble than it's worth. Blockchain specifically helps when separate entities need to be able to share the same data, which brings me to the next thing we should consider: whether or not consensus is required to validate the transactions. Blockchain can add value specifically when separate parties with potentially differing agendas both need to agree on a single version of the truth, and that they can both agree that the other person is not going to sort of edit the truth or tamper with it. The inherent digitized trust that blockchain can create allows interaction without fear that one side is tampering with that which is being recorded. And if that is not important to you, then blockchain might not be the right addition. For example, if only one organization that owns the data is completely in control of determining the truth, and nobody else is really worrying about whether or not they're tampering with the truth, blockchain may not be very helpful in that situation. Another thing we should think about is whether or not an audit trail or provenance is required. Remember that provenance sort of refers to the ownership over time, different people that have owned it, where that thing has been. So blockchain offers a secure and trustworthy historical record of this sort of information. It allows that change or movement of data to be tracked over time. But provenance is not always very important, so we need to consider whether or not it's actually required. An example where it might not be important is where you have an online store. Perhaps all of my products in the online store that are available for sale, I don't really need provenance around that information. But when we look at my transactions with customers, they might feel really happy to know that their transactions with me have been locked into a blockchain, so that once the transaction has been entered into, the record of that transaction can never be changed. Next, we should consider the thing that I started off with saying blockchain is able to achieve, and that's whether or not immutability is actually a requirement. Blockchain ensures that once we've stored the data, it can never be changed, or it's very difficult to change it. And if your data is likely to change over time, and keeping precise records of this change is not really required, then installing a blockchain might be a lot more trouble than it's worth. The final thing we should think about, or one of the final important questions, is whether or not dispute resolution should be final or absolute. Blockchain requires that there is always only one answer to the question of what the true state of the data is, or what a particular piece of the data is, or what it should be. And if it's acceptable or required that different parties might actually come to a different outcome in a dispute resolution process around sort of the same question, or if it's possible or even required that they need to come to a different result, then blockchain may not be able to provide the answer in that scenario. So with all of these questions in mind, I just want to go back to saying that blockchain certainly is a powerful and revolutionary technology, specifically when it's implemented in the form of a distributed network. So if the answer to any of these questions is yes, then blockchain might be able to help you out. But it's important to always ask the questions and evaluate the solution, because implementation of anything takes time, particularly when it's coming in to replace something that already works. So you should take the time and ask these questions before spending all the time and effort implementing the solution. And that certainly is it now. Now you guys really get your Bitcoin blockchain medal, you know, everything about that there is to know about blockchain. Before I hand back over to Albert, I just want to read this quote that I found that I think really sums up what blockchains can and can't do. Blockchains don't guarantee the truth. They just preserve truth and lies from later alteration, which allows one to later securely analyze them and thus be more confident in uncovering the lies. And that is me. Let me hand back over to Albert.
Thanks, Bernard. Thank you for that. There was a lot of effort that went into that, and thanks for breaking it down to us. Also, thanks for speaking so fast. I think you got a lot of content into that 20 minutes, and I want to remind everyone that we will be making a recording available afterwards, because there's a lot said in a short space of time, and a lot to go think about. So appreciate you breaking that down. Like Bernard said, I want to welcome our expert panels to the discussion. So I want to welcome Connie Bloem and Erik van der Linde. So Connie is industrial engineer by trade, one of the product owners within Andile, and currently in Paris, France, representing Andile in Europe. And Erik is one of the software engineers within Andile. He's just in Johannesburg, nowhere special. No, but Erik also shared a lot on blockchain with us previously, and one of the experts in the field as well. But Connie, how are things in Paris at this moment?
Paris is lovely at this time. It's summer, so nice and warm, and I can definitely confirm that the croissants are still delicious. I just had one. I'll try to bring some along when I come back to South Africa again.
Yeah, great.
That'd be great. You should bring more than one.
Thanks for joining us, guys. And I just want to remind all of you, I've seen some questions coming through on the Q&A. So just click on a button if you've got any questions from this discussion, or any questions in general, please throw it out to the panel. But I've got a first question that I want to ask you, and I can, first one that maybe wants to answer it is, other than cryptocurrencies, what are some of the use cases for blockchain in the financial industry? So I think at one point, Bernard was talking about what all the other different industries, but particularly in the financial industry, what other use cases are there for blockchain? Which one of you want to give it a go first?
I think I'll give that one a quick go. So other than the application that we're currently working on, Just giving a slight nod to mesh.trade there if anyone wants to go look at it and squeeze around a bit. There's actually a lot of use cases going on in the financial industry right now. So the industry is exploring, they're excited. I must say the most of the use cases that I've been seeing coming around is a lot around foreign currencies, cryptocurrencies, obviously. Trade finance is actually a very exciting part of the industry that is booming with supply chain finance as well. And then a lot of the technologies that I've been seeing coming through is more on the infrastructure kind of side. So where people try to solve for payments or try to provide wallets and secure places for you to store your private keys and so forth. So it's all the supporting technology around blockchain that's also starting to take place. And then a lot of the solutions try to solve for the flow of physical assets as well. So gold bullions is another favorite one, and it speaks to the use case that Bernard was highlighting on the diamonds as well. So there's a lot of movement currently going on.
Got a question that came through from Jens, and I think it's in line with what you kind of spoke about, because there's a lot going on. There's a lot of uptake. There's a lot of excitement around blockchain. But the question that Jens is asking is, if blockchain is such a powerful technology, why haven't we seen a faster uptake or transition towards blockchain? And blockchain has now been around for a couple of years, and I think it's a relevant question to ask. And any one of you have a view on that?
I'll give a bit of a stab at that question. I think that one of the reasons might be because people are not completely sure what you can really use it for. I think that because Bitcoin became so astronomically almost popular, everybody was talking about Bitcoin. It makes me think of when people talk about, the sort of tulip bubble that popped, where the idea of the economic bubble came from. That's sort of, I think, what everybody thought blockchain was, that it was sort of the same thing. And maybe it's possible that people were not able to, or people were not aware that there are other use cases for blockchain, like I pointed out in this presentation. That's what I think is quite a kind of core reason, perhaps, is that people not being aware of what you can do with the technology.
Yeah, I think maybe I'll also just jump in there a little bit. Thanks, Albert. I think there's a lot of education that needs to happen and sort of information sharing that is required for people to be comfortable with the technology and understand what is a safe way to use it. I think if we think back to when online banking and internet banking sort of became a thing initially, it was also not probably recommended for everyone to use, but as time evolved and more information became available and what is a safe way to use online banking. Same thing is what we require now for blockchain. So people need to learn the technology, learn how to use it in a safe way, get familiar with it, and be able to protect themselves through the information that should be made available.
Do you guys think we're going to see a quicker take-up now? Do you think there's been a lot of groundwork done and there's a lot of investments done by different industries? Do you think there's going to be a quicker go-to-market and quicker take-up of blockchain where we are? Or you think it's still going to take a while of that educating and familiarizing themselves with it?
I think uptake is definitely accelerating. We see a lot of innovation and tools around the technology evolving, which makes it easier for people to apply the technology to different industries. Like Bernard just showed us, there's a lot of different industries that's now also sort of starting to make use of this amazing technology. And people are just sort of starting to build out the tools around the technology, which makes it easier and safer for people to adopt. I don't know, Connie, maybe you also have some insights into that.
Yeah, most definitely. And I think one of the biggest barriers to entry within the financial industry specific was that people were very wary of regulation around blockchain and blockchain technology. So trying to regulate the technology instead of regulating the use case or the application thereof. When we get questions around anonymity and questions around safety, it's not truly because of the blockchain, it's because of the use cases that people were trying to solve for that were very risky, or people weren't certain about it, or the education levels weren't where you're required to make good regulation to control these kind of use cases. But we're definitely seeing a lot of acceleration. We're seeing a lot of bigger parties showing interests into the technology and the applications thereof, and a lot of commercial value also coming forth. It's no longer just in experimental phases and proving of the concepts, but people are actually putting real money behind real solutions at this time.
Connie, just on that point, are you seeing that the regulators are investing quite a bit of it? So the central banks, are they? So that's always the difficult thing with the regulators. Are you think that they investing in experiments? Are they trying to get ahead of the curve with that? What are you seeing in the industry around that?
Most definitely. If I just take some of the initiatives that we are currently involved in and some of the opportunities that we are looking at, especially within the South African context, I think we are very fortunate to have a central bank that are actively looking at the regulation and actively investigating the use cases that they are seeing within the industry. It was an amazing move from the South African Reserve Bank to create the group that they call IFWG, to actually start talking to the industry around the regulation and the applications thereof. They also have a nice sandbox environment going on where you can apply and go test your use case within a regulatory framework. We're seeing the same thing coming up in Europe. Banque de France just has had a big RFP on that, where they're looking at the applications of central bank digital currency. And we're also seeing a lot of the other bigger central banks throughout the world either trying to issue their own central bank digital currency or trying to invest in some of these use cases. And they're all working together and talking together to actually start getting the regulation to a place where these technologies can actually come to the forefront and actually start actively participating within the market.
Okay, yeah, we're getting a couple of more questions coming through, and I know you guys can see it on your screens as well if you want to shoot it. But I'm gonna ask this question just around regulation and safety. So is blockchain safe to use, and how are people getting hacked? I think that's a question that people are asking quite a bit.
Well, I'll take a bit of a stab at that, and I think that before I directly answer the question, I'll just sort of maybe give some context to the question. I think, especially after maybe the presentation that I've just given, I think people might almost wonder what is even the point of hacking it if you can just get access to it, especially a public distributed network where everyone can almost get access to the database. And so with that that idea in mind, I just want to talk about the fact that it's not typically the blockchain itself that's getting hacked in sort of the stories where you read about articles or something where large amounts of Bitcoin have been stolen or something similar. It's usually the pieces of information that you as an individual, if you want to access your own assets stored inside the blockchain, which are known as private and public keys. It's sort of like the piece of information you would use to access your bank account, like your PIN. And so typically those hacks are when large amounts or some numbers of those private keys are getting stolen. So the pieces of information that you actually use to access your assets on the blockchain. And that's not really got anything to do with blockchain. It's more around organizations that are not capable, or they haven't put enough effort into security around storing people's private keys.
Okay, yeah, it's a good answer. I like it. Bernard, anything you guys want to add there, or should we go to the next question?
Yeah, I think that's a good answer. I think maybe just something to mention there is there's, again, referencing all the technologies that's evolving around the ecosystem. There's a lot of technologies that is being developed to help people securely store their private keys. I think if I am a very wealthy individual and I have full control over my private key, I would want to leverage some sort of expert or trusted third party to make sure that my money is safe. Since that is not my expertise, I think that is the ecosystem that we're looking for, that needs to evolve now, sort of the next phase of making blockchain safe for everyone, establishing where do we keep our keys safe, who should we trust with the passwords to our accounts. And I think that is where we'll see a lot of that sort of technology evolve over the next couple of months and in the near future.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to go back to some of the questions coming through from the people, from the attendees, and I've got one here coming from Nishan, and I'm going to challenge our panel a bit with this question. Well, I'm thinking it's again, share your thoughts on Axiom. The idea is let's start conversation. Let's have conversation. But the question from Nishan is, when blockchain and cryptocurrencies become more widely used, will Bitcoin be used as a global or national currency, or are state-owned cryptos more likely to become the standard that will be used? And I think this is a good question for a panel, just to hear your views and your thoughts around that.
So,
I think my thoughts on this, sorry, Connie.
no, go for it.
So I think in the near future, we're not going to see the adoption of Bitcoin on a national level by governments. So in the near future, governments will probably issue their own state-owned cryptos and stable coins that's linked to something that they can control based on their monetary policies. I don't think Bitcoin is going to go everywhere, and I do think overall the adoption will keep accelerating and growing, and that will make Bitcoin become a more stable store of value over time. So what do you
I think that's a good way that you're putting it, Eric. It makes me think of sort of perhaps the analogy between sort of fiat currencies or currencies that are issued by central banks and currencies and gold today. In the same way that gold, you could use it to transact peer-to-peer almost, if you could carry the gold, because I think it can be quite heavy if you want to buy lots of stuff. And it's not controlled by anybody, so it's almost hidden. You could make transactions sort of privately, but at the same time, it never became kind of commonly used as a currency. I would think that maybe the analogy between those two might be the same as the analogy between sort of a state-issued crypto and Bitcoin.
Yeah, and the big thing about Bitcoin is no central authority controls it currently. That is yet the benefit thereof, and also the biggest detractor of wider, let's say, uptake of utilization of Bitcoin. So I do agree with Eric. I don't think that people or countries that therefore would actually utilize Bitcoin as part of their monetary supply. So that would actually imply that they control it to a certain extent, and also can control the inflation, and therefore control the usage thereof. I think it can become a part of the flow and the usage in a wider global network perhaps, but not within countries and localized use. We will definitely see bigger conversations coming through on central bank digital currencies, whether that takes the form of a true part of the monetary supply, or will take the form of a stable coin which is just based on your monetary supply that you already have in circulation. I think in the next 4 to 5 years, that would actually be the biggest conversations going on around that, because I do not think that we are going to fundamentally see those kind of changes within the control of our economies and the monetary supply to actually allow for foreign currency to become part of your circulation.
Yeah, I think
Can
I
you
would
use it to,
like
yeah,
to
go
see
for it.
the adoption of online retailers sort of accepting Bitcoin, just sort of making the technology more usable overall. And I think we will see that. I think we will definitely see that keep growing and keep being adopted by more and more retailers.
Yeah. Connie, you mentioned something I want to just zone in a bit on, as the term stablecoin. It's maybe not a term that everyone is as familiar with. Like we've been talking a lot about Bitcoin, and I think it's because, well, that's a term being used and not necessarily a term. But what is the difference between a stablecoin and Bitcoin?
So Bitcoin is known as something called a cryptocurrency. So other things that form part of cryptocurrencies would be Ether, Lumens, whatever you can basically trade on some of the crypto exchanges. Those are all currencies that aren't issued by a central authority. So that means there's no central government or central bank that actually issues those currencies and controls them. A stable coin is then something that is based on a well-known either currency or, let's say, commodity, or anything that can ensure the stability or the price of that currency. So for example, I can have a rand, which is my bank account, and I can issue a stable coin on top of that rand, just one-to-one referencing back to it. So saying that here's my digital representation of that rand, but here's the 1 rand lying in my account, and that would generally be known as a stable coin. That is also different from fiat currency. Your fiat currencies would then be your rands, your dollars, and your Australian dollars that are issued by the central authorities.
Okay, and that's what we're more seeing from the experiments that the central banks are doing to attach it to something that is tangible and real.
Yeah, so some of the biggest experiments going on there is to see whether the central bank digital currencies form part of the fiat currency component or form part of the stable coins component thereof.
Okay, all right. Got to kind of going to go back to a couple of questions coming through. We've got some coming through, and yeah, I think a good one coming through from Lawrence. We've had it on our axioms in the past. We've spoken a lot about trust, and we've spoken about trade and trust, and we've spoken about fake news more recently. And a bit of a left side coming here from Lawrence, but do you see blockchain technology being used to prevent fake news?
Sure. I would start it off by saying that sort of the last quote that I ended off there, that blockchains cannot guarantee truth. They can just preserve truth and lies. So what might, if you get a particularly maybe dangerous or damaging piece of fake news, and if you were able to somehow record the information of who published that fake news, or perhaps if you had a large group of people that came together and they agreed on what a correct news story is, and then that went onto the blockchain, it may be able to preserve the truth, and it may be able to preserve the lies, or who generated the lies at least, but on its own it can't combat fake news. That's up to us all to do our research.
I think maybe in addition to that, it could definitely be used to determine the origin of certain news stories.
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
And as different news agencies are very reliable on their reputation, they would definitely try and establish sort of a good reputation, and they can use the blockchain to prove that all the stories that they publish are in fact published by them, and therefore you can indirectly trust these news stories. So there's definitely application in using blockchain to sort of at least establish the origin of the story, and therefore establishing sort of a reputation for the news agencies.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think that's the whole thing with fake news, is just establishing the origin and seeing where origin comes from. Just because putting trust in the person reporting it is not good enough to always know where it comes from. Got a question here coming from Nkansani. Is there the concept of inflation in cryptocurrencies? And if yes, how is it determined?
That's a really good question. So inflation is generally something that you see going on in economies, and which are linked to countries' economies. So it's not really something that's linked to your currency. It plays out within your currency as well, so within your interest rates and so forth. So because cryptocurrency is not issued and controlled by a central authority, you can't really calculate or imply inflation on it, because there's no central authority actually agreeing on the inflation rates and agreeing on the economic impact of the inflation, and therefore it can't be applied.
Yeah. Eric, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, no, I think I agree with what Connie's saying there. I think lots of different blockchain technologies apply different methods to sort of try and control inflation, sort of provide a mechanism for the decentralized network to sort of control the direction of inflation. If you look at Bitcoin specifically, where there's a finite number of Bitcoins that will ever exist, that economically should over time create some form of inflation regarding the value of Bitcoin. And I think every blockchain technology that is sort of invented today try and think of a new solution or new mechanism to manage inflation.
Yeah. Got a question here from Achlatzi. Just going back to the technology, and I think that we spoke, you guys probably, you have touched on it as well earlier, but what are the main challenges that, around implementing blockchain technology? I think we spoke about education, and we spoke about, just the educating people around it, but what are other main challenges that we're seeing as an organization? We've invested quite a bit in it. What is the main challenges?
I think using it correctly is quite important. I think it's possible that people out there might have gotten their fingers burnt trying to apply blockchain in the incorrect place, and then you'd spend a lot of time and effort trying to solve your problem with blockchain, because there's quite a few sort of almost cloud providers trying to offer blockchain as a service, as a solution to try and solve lots of things. And if you use it in the wrong place, you might think you're doing the right thing, and it would be very difficult to try and solve something. So that might be one situation. But I also think that another sort of application of it is trying to work out how to come to the consensus around what the true state of the blockchain is. That can be quite challenging, because there's lots of different consensus mechanisms out there, especially amongst the sort of different cryptocurrencies and digital assets. And some of them use huge amounts of computing power, and some of them don't. And understanding them and understanding how to apply them properly, I think can be a technical challenge. I'll give it over to our technical expert to see if there's anything else you'd like to add.
Yeah, no, I definitely think that's a very good answer. I think one of the biggest problems right now is identifying the correct use cases for blockchain. I think it's very easy to use it for the wrong thing, and then you sort of shoot yourself in the foot for future. I think as the tools around these technologies evolve, it becomes easier and easier to use it in different applications, and there's a certain danger in that. Everyone's trying to put something on blockchain, and there's very good use cases, but there are also the wrong use cases for blockchain, as we've seen from today's presentation.
Yeah, generally, when we go out into the market and talk to people about the technologies that we bring forth and the solutions that we put down, we do communicate the message that we do not ask the question of the question of blockchain is the answer. What is the question again? There should be a very real reason for using blockchain solutions for your use case. So trying to solve for the business value first, or the application, and then seeing what technology actually enables that. A layer on top of that is education is the biggest one that I face on a daily basis. People asking questions that are applicable to blockchains where they were 5 years ago, as opposed to all the problems that have been solved in the interim, for anonymity, for processing power, for mining, and all those kind of things. So keeping up with the pace at what the technology is moving at is also a big challenge for us.
Again, a term you used, and I'm almost going to bring this to a close. I'm not going to keep you guys too long, but the term you used there again, Connie, is anonymity. I think with the big thing with blockchain or distributed ledgers, everyone's got a copy of the ledger. What does that mean for anonymity? Anyone? Yeah, you guys want to give it a go?
Yeah, so I think I'll try and answer that in a short version. So I think the important thing with blockchain to remember is that it's transparent. So the fact that this is a ledger with account entries, you can almost think of it as you've got your bank account, and your bank account's got a bank account number. And every transaction in your bank account has got sort of a from which account address it came to, and every transaction that you spend has got a to transaction, that to account number that you paid into. And the fact that this information is available publicly, you can go look through every account that exists on the blockchain, for example, and see every single transaction that transferred money into the account and out of the account. So there's no direct identity, personal identity linked to this account. So in that sense, it's anonymous. But as you transact and over time, there's different methods to infer identity related to a specific account number. For instance, if a very simple example, if you ask me to settle a debt that I have with you and give me your account number. The moment that I make a payment to you, you can see that it came from account number 456, and therefore you've established that account number 456 belongs to me as a person. And now that allows you to go look at every single transaction that I as a person has made over time, because you can look at my transaction history, which is fully transparent. And there is the sort of crux in, you can almost always determine identity over time, but it starts off as not attaching specific identity to each account.
One last question I'm going to answer from the audience, and then we will land this, is it's a question that came through from Louis Keane. Are there trusted platforms available to ease the implementation of blockchain? I think it's it says in brackets, to Bernard's point of blockchain as a service. So yeah, you guys want to give that one a go?
I'd like to give a quick comment there, and then I'll ask Bernard to answer the rest. I think when you choose blockchain technology, the whole point is that it's a trustless system. You want to choose something that you don't trust. The technology must make it safe. Right? So you must be able to use the blockchain in a way where you don't trust the other parties in the system, but the technology makes it safe. Maybe you can add some thoughts there, Bernard.
Yeah, you can have quite a wide discussion around this question, because often the blockchain as a service offerings, they may use a private blockchain, and there's pros and cons around that. So the first thing you'd have to do is trust definitely the supplier. And I think there are a lot of suppliers that are providing blockchain as a service, such as IBM, that have got quite a big, strong name. So you can probably trust the sort of service itself. But yeah, I think that there's a lot of public blockchains that can be used quite safely as well. The service around it that's provided by some of the companies, you'd have to understand what your intention is before you use it. I think that you can get a trustworthy system, but you almost have to trust yourself to use it in the right way. Because if you're going to use a private blockchain offered by someone as a data store for your organization, so that you can sort of tell people that you're using blockchain, it may not necessarily be the right application, even though the entire thing is safe, and you might end up spending a lot of time and effort there. So I know I'm going back to the question of use case again, but the short answer is yes, there's big trustworthy names out there. I think even Google has got a blockchain as a service offering, and there are trusted services. But if you're choosing to go with them and as using a private blockchain with them, you just have to be 100% sure why you're doing it and what your motivation is.
Great, thanks for that, Bernard. Thanks for that, Eric. Connie, I really enjoyed today's session. I think it's been a good conversation. It's been good throwing this topic around. It is a buzzword, just breaking it down into its simplicity. Before we go, closing thoughts from you guys, Bernard, Connie, Eric.
Blockchain will give financial independence.
I'll steal a bit from Bernard's slide where he compared blockchain to the combustion engine. And it made me think of just how the blockchain is sort of driving innovation in the financial space, like very aggressively compared to what we've seen in the past. So it's really like a big driver for financial innovation, lots of other innovation happening in the technology space at the moment.
Yeah.
I think my closing thoughts would be that blockchain is not as scary as it sounds to be. I know there's cryptographic, I don't know what things, and hashes and algorithms and so forth, but understanding the fundamentals thereof it's actually very straightforward. It's actually very easy, and it's a lot of fun to play around with. There's a lot of tools available for you to either educate yourself or to play around with certain solutions, or companies that are trying to invest in this and building solutions. We're always open to have conversations around blockchain. We're always open to share our love and passion for what we're trying to do. So rather ask the questions and come speak to us. We're always available, but don't be scared of it. Use it, play around with it, and be excited.
Awesome. Thanks, Connie. Thanks, Bernard. Thanks for all for preparation that you put in there. It's been great. And I think just as Connie said, we are always open for conversation. I think if there's anything that you picked up today from us, is we are passionate about educating people about the simplicity and the use case of blockchain. So if you've got any questions, if you want to continue with this conversation of any of the panelists, you can email us at axiom@untitled.solutions.com. Or if you just want Bernard to make you a peanut butter lamp in lockdown, just email us and I'm sure we can get that done for you.